What if you just give yourself 1 year? What if you just ignore your feelings, your moods, your anxiety, your depression, and just give yourself 1 year? How would you feel? What would you accomplish in that year? I feel like a lot of people, they hear that and they get overwhelmed. Well, how can I lock in? How can I focus on my craft for 1 year? That's 365 days. It's a lot of time. It's hard. What a lot of people don't tell you though is that, like, the people who do lock in for a year and they're successful, and maybe they lock in for 5 years, 10 years, they're successful because they stayed so consistent. There are days where they just aren't doing their best. There are days where they just aren't trying their hardest. Maybe because they're tired, maybe because they're anxious, maybe because they're sleepy. But the one thing they do is show up. What I would do, I would constantly be in this mindset of, oh my goodness, I don't know how I can go to this practice all the time. I don't know how I can start this business and stay consistent with it when I'm making no money. I don't know how I can stay consistent with my schoolwork because it's so much work piling up, this and that. How am I supposed to do this for a year? What is this? How does this work? All these things. But if you just think about it and think about how many days are in a year, and you focus on each day, and you only focus your brain on being present on that day, that is how you succeed. Then the next day you focus on that. Then the next day you focus on that. Then the next day, then the next day, then the next day, then the next day, and you get it. You get what I'm saying, right? I think a lot of people, they realize that, like, well, I'm not doing this thing perfectly, so I might as well not do it at all. I think for that's the biggest mistake you can ever make. Because the reality is no one's perfect. All those successful people that you see on social media, on TV, in movies, anything like that, they were never perfect. They just kept on showing up no matter what. They definitely had bad games, bad practices, bad businesses that they started, bad days where they just didn't want to go on their run, didn't want to go for that swim, you know? But they still did. And maybe that practice, maybe that business venture, maybe that class, maybe that exercise probably wasn't even the best that day, probably was shitty that day, but they still showed up. And when you build that mindset, when you build that resilience of, oh, well, I feel like shit, I'm not prepared, I don't even know what's going on, but it's on my schedule, so I'm gonna do it. I think that's what brings people to new heights. I think the main moral of the story is that no matter how unprepared you feel, no matter how angry you might get, sad you might get, scared you might get, anxious you probably are, you need to sit down and write in your drawing book what you want to do and what your ambitions are. And just try.